Hey everybody, it's Savagelandsnews coming in this time with our 2023 Pro Tour meta predictions using AI. And this time we're going to see if we were right. We also have way more data to work off of now, significantly more. And with Pro Tour less than 2 weeks away, let's see what decks have what it takes to take down the Pro Tour this year. All right, so we're always going to start with Talishar numbers. This all comes from fabtcg.com. Thank you so much for letting us even have access to this data. It is very helpful in starting our journey on understanding the meta of Flesh and Blood, right? So it looks like the meta has shifted a little bit on Talishar towards the top performing new decks and the decks that beat them, to put it simple, right? Azalea and Lexi hold up 13 and 12% of the meta, right? They dominate. Rangers are dominating the meta on Talishar. Then you have Azuri, Dromai, and Bravo. And those are decks that can beat them. So we're kind of seeing this scale starting to form of Rangers versus decks that can beat Ranger, right? A little bit later in this video, we'll talk about maybe a triangle forming, but it's really just kind of looking like play Ranger or play a deck that beats Ranger. That's honestly what it is. You're going to see that Riptide fell pretty far down. He was popular, was a brand new hero, but I think people realize he just isn't going to make it right now. And same thing with Katsu, right? One of the highest played decks at the beginning of Outsiders has fallen down quite a bit. But other than that, it holds on fairly strong, right? The rest of the heroes kind of fall in line where they typically are played. And then we're going to look at top performing decks on Talishar. We have seen in the past that aggro decks, the most performing aggro deck tends to skyrocket on win rate on Talishar, and this season it's Lexi, right? Last season it was Fi. It was exactly the same way, one of the highest played heroes, one of the highest win rates. Aggro deck is always kind of a people's favorite in Talishar, and I think just in general, right? And Lexi right now is the damage dealing queen. Following behind Lexi's Dromai, great matchups into Rangers on average, and a lot of seasoned Dromais kind of just get to feast on all of these new decks like Assassin and Ranger that just came out. Briar has always had a good win rate. Oldhim has always had a good win rate. And I think Bravo's win rate is starting to go up, right? Icelander holding on to about a 50% win rate. Azalea and Viscerai holding a clean 50. And then everybody else is starting to fall a little bit negative, all the way down to Levaya, who has kind of the oddity of the lowest win rate right now. But I think that's because the new decks have a lot of on hits, and Levia cannot survive on hits when she's got 23 blood debt in her grave. So, she just implodes twice as often as she used to, unfortunately, I think. Right. And then another amazing thing to occur is that we've had a bunch of local tournaments occur over the last 30 days. A lot of 1Ks, 2Ks, 5Ks, right? So we have a lot of data to look at. So if we look at all of those local tournaments and we kind of combine them all into a single spreadsheet, at least all of the ones that I had access to, right, we're going to see a pattern start to form. Oldhim, Azalea, Dromai, Lexi, and Katsu are holding up a vast majority of the meta. No surprise. Katsu's the only one that stands out to me as a little bit weird, but I think it's a new hero. It makes sense. He just got significantly buffed. It's the new Fi, right? But you're going to see this pattern forming continuously of decks that beat Ranger and Ranger, right? And then falling behind Katsu, you've got Bravo, Azuri, two decks that beat Ranger. Icelander, who's just a really, solid deck. Dash starting to creep up out of nowhere. I'm hearing rumors of a new version of Tree Fog Dash that has what it takes. And then you kind of go down into the old heroes who didn't see any new cards really, who are struggling in this current meta. Then we look at top 8 conversion rate, and this is where the picture really starts to paint itself. 3 heroes own 50% of the total top 8 conversion, basically, right? 48% to be exact, but Oldhim at 25% conversion rate. So in the very beginning of this set, people were struggling on Oldhim, but as we all know, Oldhim has an enormous amount of cards, a lot of specialty cards, and all it took was a little bit of practice for them to adapt, it seems. Azalea holding on at 12.5%, Dromai at 10%. So again, this kind of this dichotomy of decks that beat Ranger, Oldhim and Dromai, versus Ranger, Azalea in this case, right? Briar's holding on to a pretty good conversion rate as well, next to Kano, interestingly enough. Katsu holds on to a higher percent than I would have assumed. Dash and Icelander and Lexi going down to 5% conversion rate. And then everybody else falls off a cliff, unfortunately for them, right? And then we had our Battle Hardened Richmond event, where we had 2 Oldhims and then a very diverse top 8. But if you look at these heroes, once again, 2 Rangers and Dex IB Ranger. It's really what it's kind of turning into. Rumors about this tree frog, really turtly defensive Dash that is kind of interesting to think about, because Dash typically has a good game into Bravo and Oldhim. And if it can survive the Ranger onslaught, eventually it will take it down, right? So this is a really interesting concept that has just started to form here. So looking at the Battle Hardened Richmond, we got 4 heroes who make up about 50% of the meta. Once again, Dromai, Lexi, Oldhim, and Azalea. So again, Rangers and decks that beat them, right? Bravo holding on his same spot as he was before. Kind of, he does have really good game into Ranger. Azuri has good game into Ranger, but there's probably too many Dromais around for it, and a lot of really hyper fatigue Oldhims. So that's kind of rough as far as conversion rate goes. And then you got Dash, who surprised me once again, but it's starting to make sense. And then the rest of the decks kind of all in order down here, right? Then we look at conversion rate. Oof, this is where the picture is like clear, right? Oldhim, 21%. So we just saw him hold 25% of the meta and 21% of the top 8 conversion. Starting to look like you're going to have to figure out how to beat Oldhim. It's seeming pretty clear. Dash, 19%. We talked about it. Dash is coming out of the woodwork. Good game into Oldhim, good game into Bravo, good game into hyper aggro Rangers. I think it's probably the only matchup that Dash might be a little worried about is Dromai. There's a lot of them. Azalea and Bravo, right? Bravo being the only one that's kind of a little bit of an outlier. If you look at a little bit past top 8, you look at 9th place, 10th place, right? And a little bit down, there was a lot of Bravos who were just at the line. So I think Bravo has a lot of game. Right next to Oldhim. Azuri, Lexi, and Dromai kind of make up the rest of it, So Dromai has a pretty poor conversion rate given how popular she is, and so does Lexi, actually. These 2 decks are very popular, only 1 spot in the top 8. And then, if we combine all of these events into one view, right, the trend continues. Oldhim, Dromai, Azalea, Lexi, 50% the top 8, or sorry, not top 8, meta percent, right? And again, it's that scale, Ranger versus decks that beat Ranger. And then everybody else kind of falls into this less popular percentiles down here, right? Where Dash is the only real outlier that we didn't predict, okay? And then we look at the total percent of top 8s. Oldhim, 25%. Azalea, 13%. Dromai, 10%. That's nearly 50% top 8s. So Oldhim, Azalea, and Dromai are making up 50%. That's insane, right? Oldhim's number is ridiculous, right? And the other 2 are holding on extremely high above the competition. And one interesting thing is that Lexi, being one of the most popular decks in all of these events, has a 6% top 8 threshold. So she's not performing, or she's not converting into top 8 well at all, right? A little bit of a shocker here is probably Kano holding on to that 6%. He did so well in some of these events. Dash kind of going really high up on this, and Briar going pretty high up on this as well. And then top 8 conversion rate, right? And this is probably a bad way to look at this data, so I'll normalize it on the next screen. But you're going to see Levia God tier status, 18% conversion rate. Kano Dark Horse confirmed, right? 12.12%. And is Lexi bad? Right? 3% conversion rate. 3%. One of the most popular decks, only having a handful of top placements. So here, we're going to normalize this a little bit because 2 of those decks had very, very small amounts of players and they managed to convert at least once. So here the trend makes a little bit more sense. Red bars are how popular the hero is, and blue bars, how well it is converting. So what we're really looking for is somewhere around this slice and to the left. We're looking for the larger blue bars, right? So Oldhim, massive conversion rate, massive representation. So Oldhim, probably bar none, the best deck in the format as of this moment. Dromai, 50-50. Azalea, performing well, right? Converting really well. Lexi, not converting well at all based on representation. Bravo, converting better than his meta representation. Katsu's performing really well as well. And then Dash over here is kind of the last oddity in Briar, right? But the lower we go here, the larger the blue bars are going to get. That's just kind of the way it's going to work, right? You'll see here, there's only, I think, 1 or 2 Levias that played in any of these events, and one of them made it the top 8. So her bar is massive. Same thing with Kano. Handful of Kanos. There's actually multiple top 8 conversions off Kano, which is kind of crazy. So we're really looking at a meta that's defined by Oldhim, Dromai, Azalea, Lexi, Bravo, Katsu, Azuri, and Dash at this point in time. And you might see an occasional Briar and Kano running around, right? Of the top decks, the ones that are converting well are Oldhim, Azalea, Katsu, and Dash. And I guess Briar, right? Though her numbers are pretty small, which is why her bar is so big. So very interesting. And then let's look at where our AI was right or wrong, right? So last time I asked it, what are the top 4 heroes to play, and I gave it some weights on the data that I had given it last time. And it guessed Azalea, Lexi, Briar, and Oldhim. It's pretty spot on, right? I mean, obviously Azalea was the only deck to win an event at that point in time, so it was weighted really high. But these are on point, right? Actually, very on point. Then I said, knowing Azalea, Oldhim, Alexi, Icelander, and Briar are popular, what are the best heroes to run into it? And I guessed Azalea, Oldhim, Lexi, and Azuri. Once again, mostly accurate. Based on the win rates, these are the right choices. But, we did see that Oldhim should be number 1, Azalea should be number 2, and Lexi and Azuri probably should be replaced by Bravo and, another higher performing deck. And then I said, if Azalea is the best hero to beat, or the best hero, which hero should we play to beat it? And it guessed Dromai, Bravo, Lexi, and Oldhim. You got 3 out of the 4 right? That's pretty good. Lexi, again, not performing that well. It doesn't have the best Azalea matchup in competitive events. On Talishar it does, but in competitive events it does not. So it got 3 out of the 4 right. Pretty nuts. And then the final question I asked it is there a possible dark horse? And it guessed Kano after some mind-blowing table analysis that it spit back out to me. Let's jump back to that table real fast. Yeah. So its dark horse guess was creepily accurate, if you ask me. Of all of them to guess, it picked Kano based on its win rates into the top performing decks, and that turned out to be pretty true. Kano has a surprisingly good win rate into the most performing aggro decks and the Guardians. Even on Talishar, Kano's win rate percentage as a whole has moved up to 49%, which is higher than it has been in a while. So it was pretty right. So let's dive into a tier list now. Based on all of this data, based on what the artificial intelligence has told us, let's see what the meta should look like. All right, so let's start with the very clear, obvious choice here, right? Oldhim is the best deck in the game currently, right? Until these other decks figure out a way to deal with the hyper fatigue Oldhim. All of the data is showing that Oldhim is the deck to beat right now, right? So much so that he's probably in a tier of his own, which is kind of crazy. After how many cards were taken away from him, after losing Winter's Wail, he's still performing this well. I think that says a lot about the power of Frost cards, the power of his hero ability, the power of Earth cards, and Guardian cards in general, right? Another pretty easy choice here is Dromai is up in the A tier. Now, historically, Dromai has had a hard time converting to wins, which is the only thing that has been pointed out through the data as a reason why you should maybe not play her. Although several of these 1Ks, she did win. But when it comes to major events and you're facing a wall of Oldhims, Dromai is a very difficult deck to play. And getting through 14 rounds of Dromai games is pretty difficult. Now, luckily, these players do hit the draft as a large part of their playment or their games. Dromai still has to win, and in the time limit, right? A lot of Dromai games do go to ties. So we'll see how she performs at the end of this, but she does convert really well in the top 8. She has good matchups into a lot of the most played heroes right now. So She is an A tier deck, right? Is she an S tier deck? Definitely not. She cannot convert to wins like Oldhim can. Okay. Unfortunately, our friend Phi has fallen pretty far down. He's not even the best ninja anymore. So I think Phi, granted, he's not an awful hero at all. Don't take this that way. But in this current meta, for winning a Pro Tour event, Phi is not the right choice. Icelander, interestingly, does not have the greatest meta representation, but does have a pretty high conversion rate to top 8. Granted, she has not closed an event. She's closed less events than Dromai, actually, recently. So Icelander belongs somewhere in the B or A tier, but I think we'll adjust this as we go. Okay. Now, obviously, star of the show is gone. Azalea, probably the second best deck in the game right now, based on all of the numbers. High meta representation, high conversion rates, has won events. Azalea is probably up here next to Oldhim, but Oldhim right now statistically is in a tier of his own, right? Boltyn, not very well represented and has zero conversion rate, actually. So Boltyn, unfortunately, not performing in this meta at all. Bravo, based on the numbers, Bravo's conversion rate is really high based on the amount of representation he has. Another interesting thing is he is continuously cutting it very close to making top 8 and has a top 8 placement in most of these tournaments. So Bravo is probably up there as one of the, top 5 decks to play right now. Dory, interestingly enough, has won an event recently, has a really high conversion rate, but a very low play rate. And the deck that won the event was very interesting compared to what I've seen in most Dory decks, like triple Twinning Blade, triple Iron Song Determination. If there's just merit in the way that she's being built that has changed the way she can convert into Oldhim, especially Hyper Fatigue Oldhim, I just don't see it. But conversion rate is there. It's very strange. But I would put her in the B tier because I don't think she's going to perform that well against a wall of Oldhims and Bravos. Arachne, unfortunately, not converting well, not played very much. Briar's converting very well. Low play rate, though, but converting very well. So I think she's just a solid aggro deck, right? Kano, performing way better than anticipated. Way better. So is Katsu. So we're going to have to do some rearranging here. Lexi. Now, here's an interesting one. Lexi is one of the most played heroes. Highest win rate on Talishar, but a conversion rate of 3% into top 8. There's a story being told in the data that I don't have access to here, right? I don't have the games of every player. I don't have their matchups in every one of these events. I only have top 8 matchups and conversion rates. So there's a story somewhere in the data that is saying that Lexi is unable to perform into the meta right now, even though she's one of the most played decks. So it leads me to believe that she is not an A tier deck right now, which is mind-blowing to me because she has all of the signs of being an overpowered meta hero, right? But that's what the data is showing. Dash performing really well. So we're going to have to rearrange this column in a second based on the numbers. Riptide's not performing well at all. Zuri actually pretty well represented and has a pretty acceptable win rate. So she's probably going to be sitting somewhere in the B to low A tier. Rhinar, it makes me so sad. Rhinar has nothing. he has, very low play rate and actually an above average conversion rate for some of these other bad heroes. So he might be the best of the C tier. I don't get it. When 50% of the meta is Oldhim, Bravo, and Dromai, I have a hard time understanding why he can't convert, but the data shows that he can convert. Viserai is actually surprising. Viserai has a decent conversion rate and a really low play rate, right? So he's probably sitting somewhere here as well. And then Levia, unfortunately, yes, converted once. And if you watch that guy play, he's a madman. I respect him so much. But, 33% win rate on Talishar and implodes to most of the major heroes played right now. All right, so we look at the data once again. Oldhim, Azalea, Bravo, Dromai make a lot of sense. I think Kano drops, or Katsu drops down a little bit. And so this right here 100% makes sense. These two heroes can probably switch back and forth. Iyslander and Briar both doing fairly well, decent win rates, good conversion rates. Kano maybe just kind of a dark horse here. I think it's too easy to block Kano from doing what he wants to do if you're prepared for it. So if people want to stop Kano from going off, they can. But he's converting really high, like one of the highest converting decks currently, right? I think it goes Levia, Kano, Oldhim. So there's something going on with Kano. But I would say this is a pretty safe estimate of the tier list right now. The big question mark, in all honesty, and that I don't have enough data to go off of, is Dash. It seems very recent that people have realized that Tree Frog or a version of like Total Turtle Dash is worth it in this meta. And there's not enough games, there's not enough tournaments to represent her conversion rate and the story behind it. So Dash is the only variable. She could be higher and she could be lower. But we're going to stick her at the end of the A tier for now with a big question mark over it. But yeah, that's the data. This is probably what you're going to be looking at when you run into Pro Tour. A wall of Oldhims, a wall of Rangers, Guardians, Dromais, and then just consistent decks here with a surprise Kano or two running around the tournament. The decks in the C tier are not converting well, except for Viserai and kind of Rhinar, but they're not played much either. All right, so I just looked at the numbers one more time because it did sit a little weird with me to put Lexi down this low. I think she was even down here. And Iyslander that high, right? Based on the numbers, it's pretty accurate. But I'm going to say fundamentally, Lexi is probably the top of B tier and quite possibly an A tier deck, right? But 3% conversion rate tells a story. And then Kano is also kind of a strange selection. You know, his conversion rate's really high. He does have good percent matchups into the top performing decks. So it is a little weird to see Lexi and Zuri right next to Kano. I totally admit that. And then Iyslander 2, you know, I just have a feeling that her representation at some of these smaller events is just like a little out of skew. You know, granted, some of these 1K events were very small. I mean, we saw Michael Hamilton lose twice to an Azalea, Brody. And we know Iyslander has a hard time with tall matchups anyways. So it's kind of strange to me that she's performing as well as she is. But sometimes you just have to let the data do the talking. So if you were to personally ask me, I'd probably move Iyslander down and I'd move Lexi kind of up. But the numbers are there. So I hope you guys have a great time at Pro Tour. Come find me, say hi. Let's hope that we make day 2, maybe even top 8. That would be awesome. Yeah, have a great day.